We hear a lot about millennials and Gen Z being the ones to watch when it comes to payments. But what if I told you there's another generation that's been quietly embracing technology?
Yeah.
A generation with a lot of spending power, too. That's right. Today, we're going to dive into the world of Gen X and their surprising impact on payments.
You know, it's really interesting how often Gen X gets lumped in with boomers.
Yeah.
But their relationship with tech is actually completely different. This generation, born, between 1965 and 1980, they saw that huge shift from analog to digital firsthand. They remember rotary phones and cassette tapes, but they also embraced the rise of the internet and smartphones.
Totally.
So that gives them this really unique perspective, makes them incredibly adaptable.
In an NMI article called Gen X, the overlooked generation in digital payments, really digs into this. And this deep dive is for all of you ISOs, PayFacs, and software companies out there. We're going to uncover why understanding Gen X is so important for your success.
I think one of the biggest things that the article does is it really challenges that misconception that Gen X is tech-averse.
Right.
In fact, NMI's survey data shows that they're often more open to new payment methods than even millennials are. For example, almost as many Gen Xers want contactless solutions as Gen Z.
Yeah, and that's huge.
Yeah.
We're talking 41% of Gen X compared to 43% of Gen Z. Those numbers are so close. It really does challenge that stereotype that Gen X is clinging to the old ways of doing things.
It really does, and it goes beyond just accepting what's new, too, A significant portion of Gen X is actively looking for more digital wallet options.
Okay.
31% want more opportunities to use digital wallets, which tells us they're not just passive users, they're actually trying to find ways to integrate these technologies into their lives more fully.
That's a powerful insight, especially for businesses focused on payments. But what's driving that desire for digital wallets and other new payment methods? Is it just about keeping up with the trends?
No, not at all. Gen X really values choice and control. They came of age during a time of really rapid change and disruption, so they're comfortable with adapting and choosing what works for them. And when it comes to payments, they just don't want to be limited.
So it's about empowerment, giving them the tools and options to manage their finances in a way that aligns with their lifestyle.
Exactly. And that desire for flexibility goes even beyond just the payment methods themselves. It really influences their whole shopping experience.
The article mentioned this statistic that really jumped out at me. 45% of Gen Xers say that having flexible payment options is very important when they're choosing where to shop.
Yeah.
That's almost half. That should be a major wake-up call for any business that's not putting a smooth and adaptable payment experience first.
Absolutely. It's not just about offering the newest tech. It's about understanding how that tech actually fits into the lives of your customers. And for Gen X, convenience and choice, those are key.
So we're seeing a generation that's not afraid of technology, but are also really smart about how they use it. They want it to work for them to simplify their lives and give them more control.
Exactly. And that leads us to another interesting aspect of Gen X's payment preferences. Their openness to cutting-edge tech like AI and wearables.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting. 30% of Gen X are open to using AI in payments. And that puts them right on par with millennials and Gen Z. So it's not just the younger generations that are excited about AI.
And when you think about how comfortable Gen X is with technology and their desire for efficiency, it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
They can see the value that AI can bring, the speed, the personalization, and the security. But there's a really important caveat here.
Right. The article made it very clear that Gen X won't adopt something just because it's new and trendy.
Right.
They want to see tangible benefits.
Exactly. For them, it has to be about saving time, getting rid of friction, and ultimately making their lives easier. They're looking for seamless integration and real actual value. And we see that same thing with wearables and IoT payments. Gen X is much more likely to use them than boomers are.
Yeah, the NMI data shows that 17% of Gen X are already using wearables or IoT devices to pay for things, and another 18% say they're ready to try it. So there's definitely a willingness to explore those newer technologies.
What I think is so interesting is that early adopter mindset.
Yeah.
It really suggests that Gen X is going to play a big role in how these technologies develop and become mainstream. It's not just about them as consumers, but about how they, as a generation, influence the whole payments industry.
So what does all of this mean for our listeners? For ISOs, PayFacs, and software companies who are trying to figure out this constantly changing landscape? What are the key takeaways?
Well, I think the biggest one is that ignoring Gen X is a huge missed opportunity. They have the spending power, they're tech savvy, and they're ready to embrace new things. Businesses really need to take notice and change their strategies if they haven't already.
It's not just about, keeping up with the competition. It's about understanding a really important part of the market and knowing their needs and what they like.
Exactly. It's about moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach and creating a payment experience that really fits the way Gen X thinks.
So how do we do that? How do we make sure we're meeting the needs of this tech-savvy, but also really discerning generation?
I think one really important thing is choice.
Okay.
Instead of pushing just one solution, offer a bunch of different payment options and let Gen X choose what works for them.
So it's about empowering the customer, giving them control of their payment experience.
Exactly. And remember, Gen X is really comfortable with self-service. They like having the tools and information to manage things themselves.
So that means things like having good online portals, clear FAQs, easy-to-use mobile apps, all those things that give Gen X the freedom they're looking for.
Right. Think about reducing friction at every point. Make the checkout process really fast and easy. And don't be afraid to use new technologies, but make sure they're actually making things better for the customer and not more complicated. And that's a really great way to build trust and loyalty.
Yeah.
When you show them that you get their needs and you respect that they want to do things their own way, you build a much stronger relationship.
It's like we've been so focused on the future of payments that we totally missed this whole generation that's ready for it right now.
And that's the point, I think. Gen X isn't just going along for the ride. They're actually shaping the payments landscape. Understanding them is so important for any business that wants to be successful in this market. And that's what makes all this so exciting. Gen X might be the forgotten generation, but they really do hold the key to a ton of possibilities in payments. For businesses that are willing to listen and learn, the potential is huge.
Absolutely. So to sum it all up, we've learned that Gen X is super tech savvy. They really value choice and control, and they're ready for innovation in payments. They're quietly making big changes, and understanding Gen X is not just a good idea. It's essential for anyone building the future of payments.
Keep learning, keep adapting, and keep an eye on the space because things are going to get really interesting.
Couldn't agree more. And that's a wrap on our deep dive into Gen X and their impact on the payments landscape. Thanks for joining us.